I confess I am a Christian, and I confess that traditional Christian theology means more to me than I can usually even speak about, because the truth it carries is so powerful and life-transforming. However, I have changed traditional Christian theology and recast it in this service into what might be called a broader language, because religion and the spirituality that underlies it are going global. That's it. And we live in multiversity, many, many different plural ways of seeing and believing. The story is boots and baby shoes. When I was about 18 and a smart kid in high school, I had a summer job working for a man who was not only rich, but a saint of the church and of life in general. And one thing I was doing for him was digging a ditch and a big hole at the end of the ditch where a spring on a hillside about 100 yards up the hill, a pipe came down, went into this pit, and then under the road and into his house. And I was going to change something about the piping there. And he asked a young man to come help me. Let's call him Joe. Joe was an uneducated guy by my standards, and did not have good clothes. He had on those old, tall, black sneakers rather than work boots. And kind of a quiet guy. Actually, I was too when my mind wasn't running. And during the process of the day, I noticed Joe was getting dirt and gravel and stuff in his sneakers, which had holes in them. And I said, you know, Joe, if you took today's wages, you could get work boots. And he said, well, I probably could, yeah. And the next day he came without work boots. And I said, what happened with work boots? And he said, well, I have a baby who's a year and a half old, something like that. I don't know the proper age, and is learning to walk. And I decided my wages would go for my baby's shoes rather than my work boots. And being a clever fellow, I said, but you could earn more wages with better work boots. And he said, but my baby is learning to walk, and I already know how. And if I get some blisters, and even if they get infected and I'm off my feet for a week or something, the worst thing that can happen to me is going to take me a week to get over. But how my baby learns to walk and walk rightly will determine the baby's life. And was he ever right? So we need to have work boots, but we also need to have baby shoes. I have several pairs that look like sandals, or cheap shoes from VOA, or socks that are split up the back. Anything that's not, I'm out in the world doing the big power stuff. So what I want to preach about is what lies hidden in the story of boots and baby shoes. And on your page, you will see, and this is why I have to be very brief, I could preach for 3 or 4 hours on this. One is the circle or hexagon, let's call it heaven, a state of a realized life. The 6 points around it, I should say the 5, plus my sarcastic official entry and exit, come from a book by Paul Bruton, who studied all the world's religions and said these are the common 5 attributes of the urge to be religious. Not just spiritual, but religious. The first is devotion. We need to know what we're devoted to. One theologian called it the ultimate concern. Most widely, he or she or it is called God. Some non-godly, we might say, or atheistic people speak of the truth with a capital T. Activists speak of the cause. We are all part of the cause. And in some ways, the word God is this teentiest, littlest abbreviation. So I ask you to consider, what is the larger word, or what is the larger reality that cannot fit in a three-letter word? There are many kinds of prayer. There is meditation, there is spoken prayer, there is prayer that is asking for something, there is prayer that is praising God. Actually, different personality types have different kinds of prayer. And so it's good to experiment and to expose oneself and engage in a variety of kinds of prayer and see which ones actually work for you. What we do Sunday morning is usually only one or two kinds, maybe three kinds of prayer. But they're not the inward personal prayer so much as outward prayer. Humility. I call humility the ongoing reality check. All the time. What's the reality? Where are my feet planted? What am I doing? And let me tell you, our egos are reluctant to do that. Our egos like to be up on top, like preachers in a pulpit, telling us what to do and throwing off all these ideas. Humility is the reality check. Then there comes a time that is sometimes called surrender. And I should point out, these are not sequential. They happen in all different ways. But one aspect of it is surrender. Some books quite forcefully say, you have to kill your mind or your ego. You have to surrender it to God and let go of it. But in fact, without egos, not only are you out of it like I am today somewhat, you can be really out of it and in a hospital. I read recently that Jesus, if Jesus were to reappear, would be diagnosed and hospitalized immediately. You're laughing. I thought it was funny too, and now I realize it's not funny. It is, but it's the truth too. Someone who acted and said the things he did certainly would not be ordained and very likely would be hospitalized because the man had surrendered. His mind had been transformed. And what a job it is to let that happen. It's not passive, it's active. We have to actively engage in the way we are transformed. And then there is grace and gratitude. Grace is a feeling that comes over us, a kind of disbelief, strangely enough. How could this be? How could this be? I could feel it during the peace today. My arms were all tingly. Everybody was singing louder than the organ, louder than the hymns. It's grace. And grace, as an attitude, is gratitude. And gratitude leads to thanksgiving. And so if you want to have a real good Thanksgiving, try to be amazed. Notice things. Let things come over you to the point where you kind of lose it and are thankful. One last thing, the entry and the exit. For some time, I've been told that heaven is not a closed experience. We both step into it, and then, of course, we step out of it. Then we slide into it, and then we slide out of it. I got so excited working on a drawing the other day, I suddenly, seriously, had to shut down the computer and turn all the papers over because it was just so powerful. It's grace. And the entry and the exit into the experience of grace devotion, prayer, humility, and surrender is not a closed circle. The official one is like the gate of heaven. But I have a hint for you. The gates of heaven have no locks. Some people claim to have the keys, but there are no locks. In fact, if you touch the gate of heaven, you find out you're already inside. My favorite trick is to walk around the gate because there's no other boundaries around heaven. You can go in anywhere. But if you want to be official, you'll go in through the gate. And if you want to be of a certain type, there goes the alarm clock. It's getting louder. You have to ask permission. But you don't have to ask permission